Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar about integrating multimodal raw medical data into unified patient journeys. My name is David Talby. I'm the CTO at Johnson Labs. Johnson Labs is 9 years old, and we started with healthcare NLP and building very specific models for very specific use cases. Then deep learning happened, then zero-shot learning happened, and now medical LLMs happened. And this enables us to do more than what we did before. And one of the most interesting new capabilities is what I'm going to show you today. And it's really the main thing is the ability to go from looking at a single document, so looking at a single pathology report, radiology report, and extracting findings, adverse events, clinical codes, to looking at that entire patient history, right? So over 5 years, 10 years, the patient can have multiple hospital visits, radiology tests that they do, claims, prescriptions, right? Lab reports, and we want to ask about the whole thing. So we're going to start to talk about really what are the goals of this platform and this product, and then go into more detail about how it works. So the first thing we want to be able to answer questions about patient journeys. So we want to be able to either upload or more commonly through an API, load all the documents about a patient from different sources, different modalities, and then be able to just ask questions in natural language. And when we ask questions, we expect clinicians, nurses, administrators, researchers to be able to ask them, from very simple questions like the example here, what is the age of the patient, to more complex ones, like seeing if the patient fits the inclusion-exclusion criteria of a very specific clinical trial. And we expect answers. We expect to get straight answers, accurate answers, including references to the specific documents, right, or specific rows from the patient story. We expect an explanation. We expect to be able, as you can see here, to be able to link and see where inside the long document a specific answer came from, right, to be able to kind of check inside the references. We also expect the system to be able to kind of have common sense reasoning. So for example, even as a very simple thing, if I ask what is the age of the patient, I would expect you to know, look, if you have a birthday, you should be able to infer the age from that, right? Or here, was the infant given any antibiotic? I don't want to tell you what is an antibiotic. The fact you should probably have a mapping, right, of drug, understand this is drug class, have a mapping to NDC codes or RX norm codes, right, and do that accurately. So I need you to understand kind of the structured data, medical terminologies, have kind of basic medical reasoning, and be able to explain why you are doing things. The other set of requirements that we have for this system is where we start from. Because in a sense, this could be almost easy with current LLMs if we start from nice, clean data, right? And there are systems today where if you have a one nice relational database table, right? Like for example, here are transactions that we did in our store. We can ask, what was the revenue in the previous quarter, right? Or how many cell phones did we sell? And it generates a SQL query and give you a response, right? Or can analyze a page, right? Or a single patient gives you a response, but that's not what you are looking for, because that means that all of the really hard work of working really with the dirty data as it comes, with unstructured data, with data that is not normalized across terms and terminologies and codes, data that is inconsistent, right? So what happens in real life? Here's the diagnosis with the patient, and then, no, wait, we got some of them wrong. They're not. Your patients, here it says they took this drug, here it says they took another drug. They picked up something else. They probably didn't take it. You have conflicting lab results for the same patient. You have things that are uncertain, right? We think the patient has this, maybe they don't, they say they felt this at home. Seems unlikely. So the goal is to work, when they say in all data-driven systems, garbage in, garbage out, we want garbage in. So we want to start with the raw data as we have it. And we want to be able to work on a lot of patients at scale. So it's really not useful to have a set of documents that can load once into the context of an LLM, because we're going to deal here with millions of patients, billions of documents. And we need to be able to update the data on an ongoing basis, right? So that I can ask at any given point in time, oh, why is this person here today? Or what's the latest lab results, and get an answer. The third set of requirements around this platform is really around the fact that what we are building here is not a POC or a pilot. We're building a real enterprise-grade system, and that comes with a set of requirements. First of all, it needs to be designed from the ground up to work with PHI, to work within air-gap environments. So this platform, if you deploy it within your organization, it's deployed on new infrastructure within new security perimeter. Okay, it does not call any external LLM. It does not send data to Johnson Labs or to a cloud provider or to OpenAI or to any one of those. Everything runs within your environment, the data, the processing. So all of that is there. If you're running it, it means that it needs to be operationally easy to do. Okay, so we are not, to the extent possible, we are avoiding proprietary, databases and knowledge bases and things that your own, DevOps teams, SecOps teams have never seen before. This is one of the reasons we've actually opted to go with a relational database and use a data model that's an industry standard data model that's OMOP. Because then there's a whole ecosystem of tools around it. There's open source tools. And at the end, there was a decision between going with something proprietary that would do everything we want or something open that would do almost everything we want. And it was pretty obvious that if this really is to become an enterprise data infrastructure, it needs to be open. It needs to be scalable. So we're working with organizations that serve 10 million patients, 20 million patients, 30 million patients per year. And if you have 10 million patients, you're easily going to have 500,000 data points about them over even a 5-year period. Everything from full documents to to claims, right? EMR kind of visit and events that happen. So we need to work at that scale. Okay, meaning that having a really long context LLM is completely meaningless, right? Because we're dealing here with 1 billion pages, right, and not not 1 million characters. We want to have high accuracy results, right? So just having state-of-the-art accuracy is important here. And with Johnson Labs, we use our own healthcare-specific LLMs. We want results to be consistent. So if I ask the same question twice, you'd better give me the same answer. And we want to be able to explain it. So those are the overall goals. And that's a system we're going to build. And I want to talk a bit about some of what it does and some of the kind of some of the challenges and the interesting things about it. So real patient journeys are very messy. Real people over several years are going to see multiple doctors. Different things are going to happen to them. They're not going to always go to the same provider, even where their insurance is. They're not always going to go to the doctor when something happens. Sometimes it's just tell you, oh, 2 months ago, I think I had COVID. I stayed home for 3 days. Okay. And you're just going to have that in text within another encounter. As you can see here, a typical cancer patient generates over 1,000 pages of text per year in the US. Everything from chemo, radiology, psychological screenings, dietary screening, family counseling, many different types of medications, genomic results, right? So there's a lot of variety and a lot of complexity in what happens in practice. Some of it you know, some of it you don't know. Specifically, not all of it is going to be in your EMR. Okay, because something, if you have even, you're lucky to have a connected inpatient, outpatient EMR, patients will go to different providers, they'll go to specialties, specialists, they'll go out of network, they'll buy medications out of it. So being able to connect all the data is going to take more effort than that. So here's one example patients that we worked on. It's de-identified, but as they say, based on a true story. To show the different modalities that currently we support and we know how to unify and combine. This person had 3 hospitalizations. So if you look at the EHR, you're going to have those 3 encounters within the medical record, 3 times when she was hospitalized. And that's what you're going to get from structured data. Once you add the unstructured notes, the documents, specifically discharge notes, progress notes, and radiology reports, that's what we had here. First of all, you're going to have much richer information about hospitalizations, levels of pain, family history, patient history, social determinants, phases of recovery. Very often, even things you'd assume you'd have a structured data in the EHR, like drugs and medications. Of course, every time I give the medication, look, there's a row here, is in practice incomplete, because very often someone will come to the ER and tell you, look, I've been having this terrible stomach ache for 3 days. I've been taking this pain medication. I've been taking this antibiotic for the last 2 days. It's not working. That's why I came. Okay, so only in text you'd have really what they additionally have been taking, not to mention things like diet, smoking, alcohol. With unstructured tests, you'll also have some outpatient events like radiology, right? So in this case, she said mammograms, right, and other outpatient radiology events. The third kind of modality we look at is semi-structured data, specifically FHIR resources. In this example, this patient had an out-of-state hospitalization, right? She was in a different state. She had to go to a hospital. She had her gallbladder removed while she was there. So that's a very important clinical event in her life. You would not know about it from the EHR, structured or unstructured. This is something you will get, for example, if you have a FHIR integration via an HIE, right, and a health information exchange. If you have it, what you need is you need to be able to read it in and put it together into the same time. Once you've done all of that, the kind of the fourth modality, as we call it right now, is saying, okay, once we have all of this, so we extracted the data from free text, we normalize all the data from FHIR and from structured data. The next thing you want to do is to calculate different kinds of risk scores, right? So patient risk scores, medical risk scores, and also prospective risk, right? So do we see these patients, disease progression? What do we think is going to happen to them in 6 to 12 months to the kidney disease, heart disease, untreated diabetes, pre-diabetes, depression, right, and sepsis, right, and of course there are hundreds of different risk scores that for different clinical conditions. But the point is that if you have a system that collects all the data from all sources, updates on a say hourly basis or daily basis, has this level of richness of data, it makes a lot of sense to come and say, oh well, can you just calculate those readmission risks every time something updates for this patient? And it's a great way to first of all have an always up-to-date set of risk scores for a patient. It's also a great way to productize your own risk scores. So we hear this a lot, especially from healthcare systems. Oh, our researchers build their own risk scores for whether patients will become delirious, right, or what will happen with the diet or with Alzheimer. But it's stuck in research, right? Someone writes a paper and it's done. Using a system like this, you want to say, okay, I actually have all the data. Can I calculate this also for every patient every time there's an update? So for this specific patient, here's an example of the data sources per year. So first of all, this example, we do track the woman for 10 years. You get data from different sources in different years, and of course, it really depends on the person. And then what you want is you want to ask questions, right? So and this is an example of an actual prompt that you can give the system and an example of actual responses. So you just want to put in the raw data, have the system kind of work through it, build whatever it is it's building. And then you say, describe and document the source of any information about preventative care and screenings for this patient. And here what you can see the value of having the multimodal data combined into one place. Because on the left, you see the example if you only feed the system with structured data. Okay, so if you only give it the EHR data, the structured data, it tells you the JSON data provided does not explicitly list any details related to preventative care or screenings for this patient. There are no specific entries for routine vaccinations, other screenings, and so on, because that's what you have in structured data. If you add the NLP, right, so if you add the unstructured text, both within and outside the hospital, as you can see in the middle, you get a much richer response, right? You can see that this woman has done mammograms regularly. She's a smoker, so she has done some screenings related to COPD. She's done some risk assessment, right, for skin nodules. She's done some blood tests, right? Those are the kind of things you'll see only if you have unstructured text, right? So intake report, discharge, progress notes, radiology reports, pathology reports. Once you had the FHIR data, you also had some, in this specific case, right, some psychosocial screenings that she did while she had a separate hospitalization. But the point is, you did not have to do anything other than kind of just really throw all the data into the bucket, ask the questions, and expect the system to unify all this data for you. Another very common type of questions is around summary and timeline. So, summarize this about this patient. Why is this person here? What happened to them, since I last saw them? Or present a timeline of significant events. And also here you can see what you get if you only have structured data. In the middle, what gets added if you also add the unstructured text, and to the right, what happens if you also add FIRE as another modality. There are some systems, and this is something we've looked into, that have really nice visualizations of a patient timeline. But what we have found is that the challenge with summarizing patient data is that every single person needs a different summary. So if I'm a doctor and I have a patient, I'm asking, okay, I want a summary of their situation. It's very different whether I'm their GP, right, and they're coming to me for the annual screening, or they are right now in a hospital, and really I want a summary of the previous 12 hours, because I'm just coming in for a new shift, or whether they're coming to me a week later, I just want a summary of the whole hospital stay. So what happened day to day just not as relevant. Or let's say I'm a cardiologist, right? So I really don't care about most of it. I only care about one organ, right, and what needs to be done, or basically why you will refer to me. So really what we found is that when people say summarize the patient, each and every person means something different, needs something different, and even the same person in different contexts, right, or different time periods needs something different. So really being able to prompt and just ask and receive responses that way is very useful to people. So one thing you'd want to do is ask questions about one patient, but while we're at it, why not ask questions about the whole population, right? So basically build patient cohorts. So if one big capability is summarize a patient journey, another one is building patient cohorts. And here's an example: show patients who were diagnosed with back pain and had spinal fusion. And you can see a screenshot of the system providing a response. And the interesting thing here is that the goal is to have medical doctors, nurses, administrators do this, people who are not data analysts, okay, definitely not data scientists. So those are people who should not be aware of the fact that, for example, back pain is not a thing. Back pain maps to a whole set of diagnosis code. So, for example, ICD-10 codes, right, to SNOMED codes. And back pain could mean different things. Similarly, spinal fusion is actually a set of different procedures, right? And if you look at the result, you look at the condition name, you also look at a procedure name, especially. You can see that spinal fusion, is actually maps to a collection of procedures, right, that map to that. But what we want is we want people to just ask the questions, get the results. Okay, where the system understands what they mean, so that they don't need to do that. And if they want, they can obviously come back and say, well, no, when I say spinal fusion, I mean this, I do not mean that. Which is why the explainability part is very important. But the point is that you do want to have a specialized LLM that understands queries, maps them to multiple terminologies, hierarchies, and that does this for you. Otherwise, really, it does not work, right? If you want to ask general practitioners to come say, oh, you need to list the SNOMED codes that you want, you need to understand hierarchies, you've lost them at that point, right? The system is not useful at that stage. And the goal here is to go really well beyond the traditional cohort building systems, right? Where you have to specifically understand the schema, understand the fields, and understand the terminologies. The other thing you want to do with cohort building is you want to be able to combine documents from different modalities and understand timelines. Okay, for example, what drugs are prescribed after patients are diagnosed with atrial fibrillation? Okay, so the keyword here is after, right? So I need to understand that within a timeline, right, a patient was diagnosed with something, at some point afterwards they were prescribed with something else, right? And this is very common if you really just following any disease progression for a patient. If you're looking for adverse events, right? So people who complained about insomnia after starting to take this drug, or within 6 months of starting to take this drug. So being able to ask really in very natural language about the timeline, have the system understand that, build a really complex queries, right? There's joins, time windows queries, different levels of aggregation that you need to do. Is one of the capabilities that you just expect the system to do. Okay, so the goal is really to open this, so that this being able to use this data source these unified data sets can be done beyond a team of BI analysts, right, or people who really are familiar with the schema and the tools. This is probably the most important thing I've learned about the benefit of this system. Usually when people see this, the first reason they kind of, they come for the ease of use and the convenience, right? So they say, okay, so I just, drop in my garbage data in one side, and then I can ask those really cool questions and get Cohort and summarize patients. Like, yes, it's easy to use. It enables a much broader set of people to ask those questions, right? So instead of having to email a data analysis team, right? You Epic Clarity or Caboodle experts, right, who know the thousands of tables, right, and how to optimize them and understand clinical terminologies. Instead of that, people just ask the questions and get responses, right, and can see explanations and interact. And that's usually why people come, for that level of convenience, right, and ability for more people to make use of this. But this is why they stay. And after that initial kind of shine of this is super cool and super easy to use, and kind of the ROI is obvious because many more people can get answers much faster. The other thing you will realize is that a lot of the answers, especially related to what's here, clinical coding, clinical decision support, and patient risk adjustment, are going to be just much more accurate. And they're going to be much more accurate for the simple reasons that now you've actually combined all of this data. And here you have examples of 2 papers, but there are quite a few others. These specifically look at ICD-10 coding, right? And look at the simple questions. Find me all the diabetic patients, right? Or all the patients that are on an antidepressant. One of the challenges, when you say, okay, I understand what is a diabetic patients. If you look at structured data, if you look at claims, if you look at problem lists, what's going to happen is that the right codes are going to be missing, and not from 5% of the patients. They're going to be missing usually from between like 1/3 to 1/2 of the patients. So anything you're doing with clinical decision support, even like the kind of very simple things like LACE readmission score. LACE readmission scores depend, among other things, on patient comorbidities. You're going to be missing comorbidities unless you combine the data from all the modalities, right? Unless you don't actually have all of my hospital visits, you haven't actually read and extracted from the unstructured text, right? Everything I told, right? The clinician, even if it's not kind of coded properly, you're going to see a lot of things that are missing. A lot of the history is going to missing, even like simple things like counting, right? Previous visits, right? Previous medications, previous hospitalization is going to be missing. And this is why people do patient risk adjustment projects, right? With NLP, right? This is why people do clinical decision support projects that use text, right, or use FHIR, right, in addition to structured data. But what you can do here is really take all the modalities, and over time you can do more. You can add images, you can add patient-reported outcomes, right? You can add surveys, right? You can add really PDFs that people email to you, right? If you, right, if people are transferring from other hospitals, and that's the only way to access the history. So you really have this full patient history. You extract the information automatically, you enrich it, you normalize it, and as a result, all of these really clinical decision support, revenue cycle, risk adjustment, population health data, any downstream analytics you do is just going to be much richer and more accurate. And that really seems to be the game changer once kind of people understand that this is something that this system can do. If you go to www.nlpsummit.org, you can see a whole number of case studies around medical language models being put into good use. These 2 specific case studies may be interesting to you if you're interested to see Johnson Labs medical LLMs in action. On the left is a case study from Roche around using healthcare-specific LLMs to build oncology patient timelines. So specifically looking at things like extracting information from radiology reports, pathology reports, and next-generation sequencing reports, and putting this on a timeline, as well as recommending clinical guidelines for those patients, right? So what is the next best action for a patient? On the right is a case study from West Virginia University, where the focus was on the revenue cycle side and specifically on HCC coding. And with that, we talked a bit about kind of what we want to get done and why is it hard. Now I want to talk a bit about the pipeline behind it and really what we do to the junk data that you send to the raw data and how it gets processed. So this is really a lot of the system. The system is deployed, as I mentioned, on new infrastructure. It's a Kubernetes deployment. It has quite a few internal components and moving pieces. And what I want to cover is kind of the basic pipeline that we've built here. And really there are different containers for those pieces. Overall, I'm not going to talk about the scaling architecture, but this is designed to have scaling of individual components. Within Kubernetes, you can also decide what runs on GPU, what runs on the CPU. You can scale it up and down depending on whether you're loading a lot of DICOM images or PDFs, right, that needs to be OCR'd, or it could be just tabular data. So you can kind of balance what needs to be scaled, what needs to be monitored, what you do with failover for different types of pieces. But let's focus on what the actual processing is. And when data comes in, usually we say either you have unstructured data or you have structured data, so they go in at different points. And here are the key interesting parts that you need to do. So the first set of models that you need in place, and this kind of really the first kind of medical LLMs that we put in use here, do information extraction. And this could be from any kind of text. It could be if someone emails you a PDF. It could be very often within FHIR messages, right? So FHIR messages have unstructured components within them. It could be visit summary, medication instruction, and so on. And also very often within tabular data. Within structured data, you're going to have fields that are free text fields. So what you need to do is you need a component that can automatically extract things like medications, anatomical part, treatment paths, social determinants, family history, suspected events, negated diagnosis, past, present, and future plans, biomarkers, right, histological values, radiology findings. Right now with Johnson Labs, there are more than 400 types of entities we know to automatically extract from free text, right? And those are all models that were designed, trained, validated by medical doctors on our team. So what you extract are things from, like, for example, right, the patient is a 40-year-old Black woman with breast cancer. She started smoking when she was 20 years old, but she quit several years ago. Her mother died of breast cancer at age 55. So we need to extract breast cancer twice, but it's very important that the first one, we need to know that it's present, right? In contrast to Black woman without breast cancer. So in this case, she has it. In the second time, we have to know that it's related to someone else, right? So that in the second sentence, it is clinically relevant to know there is a family history of breast cancer, but we have to know its family history and not about the patient, right? Because if we just extract breast cancer by itself, it's meaningless. Smoking is also relevant, but also we have to know it happened in the past, right? So other than kind of the entity recognition, we also have models for what we call assertion status, relation extraction, and clinical coding, right, that can extract those semantic filters. Once you have the terms, you need to resolve them to standard codes, right? Mostly we resolve to SNOMED, but we also have resolvers to 12 other terminologies. This needs to happen for entities you extract from unstructured data, but more often the problem is with the FHIR resources or even kind of tabular data that comes from structured resources, simply because the code sets do not match, right? So you have different types of loin codes. You have ARCSNOM code for drugs. Here you have NDC codes. Here you have some custom data set for pathology results, and here we need to map it to SNOMED. So there's a whole terminology service that is able to do these kind of mappings in an automated fashion. The third important components here relates to dates, because as I mentioned before, the temporal aspects of queries here is very important, right? The whole point is to build the whole patient timelines. So when we have text, we need to be able to look at something that says, for example, when Tom visited the Bahamas last year, something happened, okay? So we need to understand the term last year, and we need to map it to an exact date. So for example, if this note is from July 1st, 2024, last year should be normalized to July 1st, 2023. Okay, and we need to know something happened there, right? And, like if there was a hospitalization, there was a diagnosis, there was a symptom, they took a medication, they changed their diet, those social circumstances may change. We need to be able to extract in maybe to a date. So that, for example, let's say they were diagnosed with something at the time, but now I'm trying to match them to a clinical trial, right? And there's an inclusion criteria that says I only want patients, who received a positive diagnosis confirmed by the pathology report within the last 18 months. And we're asking this question today, right? I need to be able to count 18 months backwards, run a query, and if Tom is a matching patient, it needs to match, right? So this means that I need to be able to find relative dates. I need to normalize them to real values, and when queries come about relative dates, I need to be able to map them back so that I get the accurate responses. Once you do all that, okay, so you extract all the information, structured data, unstructured data, imaging data, fire data, you normalize the terminologies, you map the dates, you do all of that. What you end up with is what you have here on the left, which is in practice a whole lot of junk. Because what's going to happen is that there's going to be a lot of repetition, a lot of duplication, right? So, if I spend 3 days at the hospital, could easily be 30 or 40 progress notes, right? 1 every hour, 1 every 2 hours. There's going to be a lot of repetition about my symptoms, a lot of things at different levels of specificity, and a lot of things just come and go. Oh, you had this pain, but on day 2 is much better now. Okay, fine. It's no longer relevant. What you need is you need to look at all this information, and you need first of all to deduplicate it. Okay, for example, it says pain, chest pain, right upper quadrant pain, then please only stay with the most specific one usually. Sometimes it's not the most specific one, sometimes it's the latest one. Sometimes it's some combination, right? So if you have 10 measurements of my blood pressure of the last 24 hours, you probably want to take some median or average. So say, well, I took multiple measurements, I think that's where he is at. But in general, there's a lot of very healthcare specific logic because it's field by field for how we merge data, how we deduplicate data, and how we deal with uncertainty, right? Because I need to know how to carry uncertainty forward. And then what you do is you build that patient knowledge graph at the end with the fewer nodes. So because when we say here the patient's diagnosis, really, I want to have the actual 4, 5, 6 diagnoses to the patient. I do not want to have the 40, 50, or 60 mentions of diagnosis right in the records, because a lot of it will be either duplicated or the wrong level of specificity. And then I need to put it somewhere. I need to create a data model. And after much deliberation, we have chosen to adopt the OMOP common data model. So first of all, it's a relational data model. So at the end, once we have everything, including the explainability, the traceability, the confidence levels, everything we extracted, everything goes into a relational database based on the OMOP common data model. And this means 2 things. First of all, because it's a relational database, it means that on it, yes, we are going to have the natural language queries, right? And we'll have the specialized LLM that does that. But you can also just do dashboards, right? If you have Tableau or Power BI, right, you can just ask questions yourself with SQL. If you're a data scientist, you can just open a Python notebook and says, okay, just do SQL, load this into a data frame because I want to start training my own predictive model now. So all of that is available to you. The data model itself, I say it's an open standard. There's a whole ecosystem of open source tools around OMOP. There's all people who already build some OMOP capabilities, so you'll be able to reuse those. There are some things that OMOP does not support. For example, some of the traceability features that we wanted were not specifically in the standard. Some of the more specific levels of confidence we wanted to track were not there. So what we've done, we've added those, and there's capability in OMOP to add those customizations. At the end of the day, it was either we build our own proprietary closed models that is perfect and does everything we want, or start with an open model and really just extend it where we need to. And we chose to go with an open standard because I strongly believe that if you're going to use this as a unified patient data model across multiple modalities within your healthcare system, within your organization, as a pair, as a large pharmaceutical, it needs to be an open model, right? Where multiple tools, multiple people, multiple groups can easily interact with the data, use their own tools, build on top of it, understand what's going on. So that's what we did. The last kind of stage of it is you need to be able to answer natural language questions, right? So I have this database, say 10 million patients, 300 million rows of different things I extracted from different modalities, and ask, okay, please give me all the diabetic patients who have come in the past 6 months complaining about shortness of breath. Fair enough. I need to have something that can understand this, translates it to a query or a set of queries over this large relational database, execute it efficiently, and give me a response. And of course, continue the conversation, explain what he did, and so on. We'll see more about that soon. One thing to note about Johnson Labs, so first of all, Johnson Labs, we train, fine-tune, and use our own medical LLMs for all of the tasks here. For what you've seen, there are three main places where we use LLM. One is the information extraction piece, understanding unstructured text. The second part is the reasoning piece for merging and deduplication. Okay, so I'm saying, oh, I have this many measurements or this many symptoms of this person. How would you summarize it, basically? And the third part is, of course, understanding queries and being able to map them right to specifically this data model. And one of the things to note is that our medical LLMs have been, first of all, they keep improving, right? We train dozens of new ones every week. Recently, they've been benchmarked in a blind randomized evaluation by practicing medical doctors on 3 tasks: clinical text summarization, clinical information extraction, and medical question answering, versus GPT-4o, kind of the latest version. Here you can see the results on the clinical text summarization example. And as you can see, our models at this point in time significantly outperform GPT-4o, which is not surprising. They're fine-tuned, right, to these data sets, right? A lot of real-world data, medical doctors will fine-tune them to those specific tasks. The evaluation was blind, meaning we generate responses with the 2 models. We show them to practicing medical doctors, and they don't know which answer came from which model, right? And we randomize the order and so forth. And we ask them to evaluate 3 things: factuality, right? So is the answer correct, right? So if it's a summary, are the facts in the summary not hallucinated, right? Actually coming from the text. Clinical relevancy, right? So is the action clinically accurate, right? So if you're doing question answering, or if you're doing a summary, did you summarize really the most clinically relevant results? And the third is conciseness, right? How short is the answer, basically, right? Is it short and to the point? And we ask medical doctors basically blind pick who they prefer, right? So the options are, I prefer model number 1, model number 2, they're both equal, or I hate both of them. And as you can see here, the Johnson Labs model wins almost at the 2-to-1 ratio on all of these dimensions. So this is the basic pipeline. The last thing I want to do a bit of a deep dive into is the question answering piece. So one of the super cool things about the system is that you can enable many more people to just ask questions in natural language. Either, this patient is coming, what's been going on with them recently, or as you can see in the example here, build a whole cohort of patients. So people, they no longer need to know SQL, know how to use BI tools, or really, more importantly, understand very complex schemas, right, with hundreds of thousands of tables that EHRs, right, complex claim databases, adverse event databases, clinical guideline databases, clinical terminology databases require. But there are 3 things you need to know if you're building those kind of systems. First of all, you definitely need to use healthcare-specific LLMs. And here's one example here on the right. We have tried to look at a fairly simple queries, really find all patients, right, who've had this diagnosis before, and ask GPT-4o to do it. And it couldn't, but more importantly, what you see on the right, these are fairly complex queries. So what happens in healthcare is it's even queries that would be 10 words, give me all the diabetic patients, could easily become 2 or 3 page SQL statements, because they require you to join across multiple tables, right? So you have the a table for patients, table for clinical events, table for diagnosis, right? Table for confirmed ones, clinical terminologies, right? And you need to go within the terminologies to different levels of specificity to get the right answers. So those are much more complex query than most kind of text-to-SQL models usually deal with or are trying to deal with. So the first problem you're going to have is accuracy. It's just not going to return the accurate answer, period. But there are two other problems. The second problem is consistency. When you deploy this system, the fastest way is to lose all credibility with your user base is to tell doctors, look, just ask the system. If you don't like the answer, just ask again. It will probably tell you something different, right? And LLMs do this, right? And if you don't consistently return the same response time after time, right? And I asked like a very straight question, right? Like, has this patient ever been on antidepressant? Yes or no? You need to to tell me, and you need to explain the results. If you cannot do that, then the whole thing is useless. So we need that consistency as well. And the third important thing is speed. One other thing you cannot do is you cannot enable people to ask any questions they want and then automatically translate it to a SQL query and run it, because then very soon someone is going to do a select star from a table that has 200 or 300 million rows, and the whole server is going to come crashing down on everyone. So really what you need to do here, especially because a lot of the queries are complex, require multiple joins, require complex tables, require large tables. You need to use things like indices, you need to use things like materialized views, right? You need to have caching. And then what you need to do, you need to fine-tune your LLM, the LLM that answers the queries, to use these optimized queries when it asks questions, right? So you cannot just do any SQL you want. You need to come say, look, here are specific types of queries that I've optimized for, right, that I can answer on a large body of patients quickly. Please use those. Okay, and that's a very important thing in practice, because if you remember, we are targeting these towards end users who know nothing about relational database and how you optimize them and what it means to operate them effectively. The second thing to know is this actually isn't a text-to-SQL problem, right? So initially, when you look at it, you can say, okay, you ask for all diabetic patients and you translate to a SQL query. There are specialized LLMs that do text-to-SQL. And we've tried all of them, including building our own. It sort of works, but you run into serious issues at the end. And what we've turned into is really building an agent, an AI agent that takes multiple steps to really resolve some of the issues I just described. So right now there are 4 types of steps. There are 4 steps. There'll probably be more in the future. But what we do is when we look at a query, we actually the first step is we call a tool that has a RAG component that tries to map the query to basically pre-built queries that we know how to run efficiently and we know how to run well. So we try to find the most similar query, right? So for example, it could be, we have a query to find patients, with some disease, right? By by age and gender. Okay, so that's pretty close, right? We can use that. Once we have the tool results, we call another tool that's a terminology service. That's hypertension, diabetes. Okay, we need for these we need the SNOMED codes, right? If you mention the antibiotics, then okay, we probably need the NDC codes. Okay, but we need to get the specific codes, right, and the subcodes for what you're asking for. So that's the second step. The third step is to basically fix the schema, because what you get in the first question, you can say, here's the SQL query for this closest thing that I found. Very often what we find is because your query is going to be slightly different, you need to actually change the schema, add fields or remove fields. Okay, here we want to by gender. Okay, well, the query I found was by age. Okay, I need to replace the column. I need to do it that way. So we have a step, a tool that adjusts the schema and adjusts the SQL that we have. And then, only then, you can actually run the results. And once you run the results, you need to sometimes do aggregates, right? And actually show it in a user-friendly way. So basically, what we are finding is not only our current text-to-SQL models are not solving it, it is probably that it's not even something in text-to-SQL models by themselves will be able to do later on, because of the complexity of the reasoning that's required here and the fact that really this is a multi-step process that an agent is a much better fit to do. So that's what we're building here. The third important thing that we have learned building the system is exactly what's written here. You have to be able to explain the business logic to your end users. And right now, if you type a query, like the query you saw in the previous slide, you get, here's the SQL, and yes, we can run it and show it to you, but you also get the explanation. And the explanation is very important because what happens in healthcare is that very often different people will say they'll use the exact same words, right? They'll type the same text, but they mean different things. Okay, so for example, find patients with hypertension and diabetes. What does it mean that someone has diabetes? Right? Does it mean that they have an ICD-10 code and diagnosis code in the EHR? Right? Because maybe I'm a billing person, it's like, look, if it's not coded, it doesn't exist. Or does it mean anyone who's taking insulin, right? Anyone who's have at least 2 abnormal H1C lab tests within the last 6 months. Okay, and actually, if you look at it, you're going to see that people within your organizations, whether you're provider, payer, research, pharma, are going to have very different definitions of what does it mean for someone to have diabetes. There are all going to be disagreements on what exactly is a patient. Patient is that anyone within their system, anyone who came here for the past year, or is a patient is someone, no, I want someone like who's actually in internal medicine in our department because I'm internal medicine, I care about my inpatient population, right? Is it anyone that as a payer I'm dealing with? If it's someone that hasn't come, but I'm pretty sure they're diabetic, right? Because they were diabetic 2 and 3 years ago and then they disappeared on us. Does it still count, right? Are they a patient? And similarly for gender, right? People would, definitely would have their definitions on that. Which is why if you've ever dealt with things like, for example, Medicare, right? Quality reporting, right? Or any kind of risk adjustment, that a query like this could easily map to, a one-page prompt, right? With all the fine print. Which means that when you're working with end users, right? Especially if they're clinical domain experts and not data science domain experts, you need to run the query, right? And then they're going to ask, wait, why is this person diabetic? I know them, right? And then they want to click in and they want to see 2 things. They want to see your business logic. Okay, so what did you count as diabetic? And they want to see this person specifically. Where did this come from? Okay, did we run the lab results? Did they say they're diabetic? Did you infer this from medication they're taking? Right, which may or not be true, right? How old is this diagnosis? Right, it could be yes, they were diagnosed 3 months ago. Today we know that that was just the wrong diagnosis, right? We changed our mind. So the only way to do that is to show those explanations to the users, enable them to interact, enable them to change their answers. Really, otherwise, the system is simply going to be useless, right? Because the details matter in healthcare, right? And for each one of those one sentence queries, you're going to show the same result to 5 different people, and each one of them will explain to you why you were wrong and you gave them the wrong cohort for different reasons, right? Because they have a different interpretation, right, of who should be included and who shouldn't. So those are the main 3 things to remember. And I think for us it's been a very interesting journey because we are learning these things. We are deploying these systems now. We are seeing how people use them. Sometimes they go for 1 or 2 use cases. Sometimes they want to go more broadly, different modalities, different things they expect to get out of it. Also, it's very interesting to see what happens when end users try the system, because of course they try things you did not expect. And the whole point of this system is to be able to open access to this data to a whole bunch of users who really do not have access to it today. Right, people who only get reports, right? Only can email if they have a question, right? And email to the data team and get in line. But I'm saying we are learning a lot. This is a system that exists. It's ready to deploy today. If you are interested in this, it has 2 components. There's the software and the models that you would license from Johnson Labs, and we only do this now as a 12-week implementation project. In the implementation project, we partner with your team, but we come in, we install this in your infrastructure. We make sure that the security setup is there, the scaling setup is there. We integrate with whichever data sources you want. It could be anything from here's PDF, right, on an S3 folder, to here's my Epic Caboodle data store, to look, I have DICOM images over there. Here's my Fire API key, go with it. We customize which terminologies and which mapping you need. What do you care to extract from the unstructured data, right? And how do you want to define specific things? And then we also optimize really the specific queries and specific voice that you want the system to have, right? Because also different people want to see basically different kind of answers, shorter answers, longer answers, different levels of specificity, different data that should be included or excluded. So that's really the implementation project where we don't just throw the software over the wall. We come, we work with you, we put in an end-to-end system so that in terms of both the end users and the operational and data people, we make sure we actually have a production system that works. As I mentioned, some of the things to note, it's available across platform. So whether you're on-premise, on AWS, on Azure, on Databricks, on Snowflake, on Oracle, yes, we have deployed there, we can deploy there. It only runs within your infrastructure. So under no circumstances are you going to send PHI outside your network or to Johnson Labs or to any other third party. Also, because we use our own LLMs, there's no calls to any API or LLM API that's a third-party API. Nothing will ever leave your system. Anything that you build custom is going to be your own intellectual property. So for example, if you're looking to extract information so that you can do data monetization, right? You can license de-identified data to third parties. You want to enable researchers, right, to use the data. That is all yours. So the data is not shared with anyone. We'll never have access to it. Any models that you build, any workflows that you build on top of the data are completely yours. The way we license it is usually it's by server, meaning that it's not by user, it's not by patient, it's not by modality, it's not by model that you use. Basically, once you have the system, the whole point is that you want to open it up to everyone, every type of data, every type of users, and really we only do it by server. And at some point we'll tell you, look, if you want to add many more patients or modalities, you probably want more servers, but it's something that you know about in advance. It's also from a budget perspective. It's fairly easy to stay flat, right, and know where you are year over year. And the last thing I would say, if you have data science teams or researchers or people who build risk models, understand what's happening prospectively with patients, this seems to be, from what we hear, a great way to productize those models, right? So you can say, oh, I build this really cool thing, here's my research paper, here's my Python code. We can take that, containerize it, and then come say, okay, now this risk score is going to be available for every patient, right, or every member that you manage. It's going to be updated whenever, right, that gets updated, and it's going to carry forward, right, things like provenance, versioning, confidence level, right, along with everything. So if you're interested in doing that, please come talk to us. If you're building other things or building this on your own and have questions, also I'll be very happy to answer any questions you have, so that we can learn from each other and just together help the healthcare community move faster. And with that, thank you very much.